do it.
So, hello everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of ClueCon Weekly. This week with us, we have a personality of the voice over IP and RTC world, Emil Ivov, good friend of mine, founder of Jitsi, VP of product at 8x8, and general authority on a lot of things. Welcome, Emil.
On a lot of things, some of them technical. Yes, I'm quite an authority on tiramisu. I really like which tiramisus are good and which tiramisus are not good. Hi,
So
Luca. It's great to be here.
we'll have to have a discussion about that because that sounds really interesting.
That's true. It is
Cool. So
interesting.
we'll do another episode specific about where to find the best tiramisu. But I don't know if you'd like to give yourself to give us a brief introduction about yourself. Maybe for three people who haven't heard of you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. You're being incredibly generous. But as you said, I'm the founder of the Jitsi project, and I lead the Jitsi project today. I'm also responsible for product at 8x8. So I'm responsible for what sort of video related services we offer and how do we help solve people's problems out there and what really are people's problems. And I think that's one of the aspects that actually interest me a lot in life these days is how I used to, like many young engineers, when you start building stuff, what exactly it is that you're building doesn't appear to be that much of an interesting question. You kind of know, I want to build this or I want to build that. And then once you've done it for a while, you realize that, well, this thing that I built seems to be only of interest to me and no one else. Why is that? And why is this other thing that I build of interest to so many people? And then you start thinking about, oh, well, actually, I appear to be solving people's problems in this case and not in that case. I think I first had that realization. I shared the story a few times, but I did my PhD at the University of Strasbourg. And while I was doing it, the way that a PhD goes or the research in academia goes in general is that you pick a problem somehow for a variety of constraints, but you pick the problem and then you go and you try to answer it. You try to prove your hypothesis of what you think is going to happen in certain cases. And maybe it's interesting, maybe it's not. Once you've been able to do that, you put it all in writing in a paper and you publish it in some peer-reviewed venue. And then if you did your job right, it gets accepted, and then you're done. And this was happening every time we had a project. We would, kill ourselves, work days and nights. We would submit, the paper would get published, and then the whole test bed, I really had these, like I would look at the test bed and it kind of seems dead. Like we have all these machines, you've put them together, you've built something very complicated, you submitted the paper, and then that thing is useless. And it has to go to the cupboard. And this really started depressing me. I remember how I was walking on the street and I would see a soldier or a policeman, and I would think, I envy you because you know what purpose you serve, and you know how you're meaningful to society. I don't. I have the impression that I'm just wasting someone else's money to scratch my intellectual itches, I felt so useless. So that's, I think, when I first had this determination that no, if I'm going to do something through the rest of my life, it's not going to be that sort of stuff. And I, by no means am I implying that academic research is useless, but you have to be comfortable that it may end up being useless. Someone's research, there's plenty of people out there who went through their life with pursuing problems that they may be solved, and then it turned out that no one was interested in that problem. Many of them didn't know that the problem was going to be interested, and then it turned out that it was incredibly so. Now, so anyways, I've been interested in more or less in the usefulness of what we do since these early days, and especially of late as we grow older, we start to ask ourselves more questions. And what we were discussing with you a minute ago was exactly about that. If you take this entire concept of meaning to the problem of privacy, it becomes very interesting, incredibly interesting. It's a question that I've been toying with lately. And the question is, when we talk about privacy and when we talk about applications that respect your privacy, what is the problem that we're trying to solve exactly?
Hmm.
How much are we trying to solve it?
Someone else not being able to, someone else that not intended to participate in the conversation, being able to read it or hear it, maybe?
Well, you are able to hear my conversation now, obviously, and there's going to be a bunch of someone else's that are going to see our recording. Obviously, we're fine with that. So it has to be more complicated than that. And then it becomes, well, someone not intended. And it's like, well, what does that really mean, someone not intended? Let's say I want someone to translate my conversation. So they go and end up translating it. But let's say that that's certainly part of the intention. They saw the content, it was part of the intention. But what if I asked you, Luca, to translate, hey, Luca, could you please take care of translating our conversation in Italian? My camera froze. Oh, there it is. In Italian. And you say, fine. And then you go and you ask your wife to do it for you. So now your wife, so it was your responsibility to translate the conversation. And it isn't clear whether that responsibility involved you delegating that work to someone else. And I might be jarred and might say, oh no, I don't think I was ready for someone else to see that. Or it could be, yeah, sure, it was, you found someone to help you. I don't have a problem with that. And this is where we get with the in the tricky grounds. Like, for example, if I go to YouTube and I watch videos. Now, I obviously know that YouTube knows what I'm watching because I know that part of the service that they're going to provide for me is select other videos that match my interests and propose those videos to me. Is it then okay for YouTube to kind of keep track of my video watching history? And the answer to that, I think, is already going to start being divisive. Some people were going to say, I don't know. I think that something doesn't sit right with me there. Some people are going to say, yeah, sure, as long as it's just YouTube. Okay, so then the next question is, well, what if it's not just YouTube? What if it's also an advertiser? And you would say, well, I definitely don't want that. And then the question is, well, really? Are you paying $20 a month to YouTube so that you don't see ads? No, I'm not. Right. But then, the platform that
Then
you're
what
using is
entitles you to?
right. But yes, exactly. What do you like? You obviously wanted the service without giving any of your personal resources. And certainly that it takes electricity and people and a lot of resources to provide that service, and not to mention the resources of the people who actually create the videos. How do you think that work was materializing, right? Something of value had to be given to these people back in return. And it turns out that there is value in advertisers knowing your interests. Now, is that a problem or not? And this is where it gets very tricky. And I think it's tricky because sometimes it is a problem and sometimes it isn't a problem. And we don't really know how to differentiate between the two. And by the way, I don't have the answer to that. There's not going to be a happy end to this interview where I say, and here's the answer. I figured it out for everyone. I haven't. I look at GDPR. I'm really unhappy with GDPR. What is GDPR for most people? It is the annoying cookie banners, right? That's how most people are directly impacted by GDPR, I think. And obviously most people dislike that. And it's so clumsy and annoying. But many people would say, no, Emil, don't be, oversimplifying. GDPR addressed a lot of privacy concerns. Oh,
Did it?
really? Okay, well, let's talk about that. What I asked a question on one of my social media accounts, I think a few months ago, and I said, okay, I have a bunch of people that are involved, know a bunch of people who are involved in standardization, and I asked, could someone please tell me the problem that GDPR, what problem was being solved exactly, and what metric characterizes it? And then once someone tells me the metric, could someone tell me the metric of that? The value of that metric before GDPR and after GDPR? Because we have to know how much did GDPR help solve the problem. Not one answer was given. Now, I'm obviously being a little bit too harsh here. And I've reached this realization as well that, you know, you can go about your life, or rather, you can address situations in your life in one of two
Mhm.
ways. You could try to be entirely rational as much as possible. You could try to plan out the consequences, plan out your next chess moves, and then worry about the bishop that might be threatening your knight or something like that, and try to avoid that immediate threat that you're seeing. The problem is that, you know, this is hard doing in chess, where you have 64 possible spaces for figures to be in, and you have 32 uh, things to move on the chessboard. Like, very, very simplified situation. And we don't. There are not enough particles in the universe to map out all the possible combinations in this simple game. Then, if we're not able to really reliably map out our next chess moves in chess itself, what does that even say for life? It means that, well, what it says, I think, is that you can probably map out your next move, maybe some shadow of the one after that, and just some inkling of what might be after that. But that's about it. And so then, how do you go about life if you cannot be entirely rational about it? Well, the other option is to kind of go and adopt some strategy, which is kind of what you do in chess as well, right? You do openings, and so you adopt some strategy about, and like, you know, I'm going to have this entire approach to life. I'm going to be, um, uh, let's say, I'm going to be to. This is what religions are, right, essentially. I'm going to be Muslim or Christian, and I'm going to adopt this approach to life. And I know that this approach isn't that bad because, you know, a bunch of people have been doing it over a bunch of years, and generally they have fared better than people who haven't been doing it. In fact, the fact that they're still around and their kids are still around means that there's something successful about this strategy. I think that's our only approach. Now, you could then compare strategies and see, does one perform better than the other? And you could argue that, yeah, I mean, I like the life in this country more than the life in that country. So maybe the way people go about life with their religion here works better. But then, well, how do you know that that's not specific to their environment? And how do you know that that's not specific to the first 100 years of applying this thing, but the next 100 years everyone dies, or something like that? So I think um, what I'm trying to get at is that, because the consequences of privacy issues can be incredibly complicated, we're kind of in the domain of life, and then the solutions very much belong in the domain of religion. We kind of go with these general rules. When I have a cookie sign, I'm going to always click no, and I'm going to use my browser with an ad blocker, and I'm going to not give my personal email when I subscribe to services. Like, you have
Mhm,
this
yeah.
this way of approaching your, you know, or your online behavior, but you don't really have a good way of evaluating its success. And you know, fair enough, it's just everyone gets to make their personal choice depending on their personal comfort. But the problem that you run into here, and it's the same problem that you have with religions as well, is that you can get completely I know in Europe we say integrist. I don't think
Oh
people
yeah.
in the US say that, but it can get you to be a complete radical, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, I only live by that
Integralist
rule.
or
It's
whatever.
it's like the Amish of privacy, right? It's like I browse the internet through links or something, and and then the question is, well, whatever it is that you gain, does it really compare, like, what you everything that you're giving up, does it really sound like it's proportionate to what it is that you actually gain? All of this so that you don't see shoe ads for shoes when you
Yeah.
go on Facebook? Was that really worth it? Um, and I don't know what the answer to that is. And I think, given that in life we've solved this issue essentially through cultures or religions, by living for thousands of years until we can have some idea about what ways of life kind of work out, does that mean that we need thousands of years on the internet in order to come up with successful strategies? And if that's the answer, then that's really bad, because internet doesn't moves at a pace that is completely incompatible with that sort of time scales. So that's what I've been thinking about recently. I don't know what do you think about all this?
I mean, there's the underlying topic here is always the same. If you don't know what the product is, the product is you. That's always been true since the start of. I don't even know. Was there any ad supported model before Google? Not at that scale, I think.
No, yeah,
Like,
I think so. I think there's always been ad supported models. There's been, um, you some TV stations have been ad supported for a
yeah,
long
but
time,
those
radio
were a bit
stations.
clearer. Those were a bit clearer in intent, and moreover, ads in television and newspapers don't track you, or at least don't track you to the same degree. All they can do is doing, this kind of cold
They don't
tracking stuff
track
where
you. Indeed, they don't track you.
they,
But
so
so, um,
even in the
l-
internet, before the advent of really, I don't know, Twitter, Google, that kind of platforms, I don't remember situations where you and I were the product in itself. Like, our
okay.
information was actually how we were paying for services.
So let's take this statement. If you don't know what the product is, then you're the product. Um, this sounds like a horrible thing, right? I am the product. But really, you're the product every day you go to work, right? You're being sold to your company. In fact, you're selling yourself to your employer voluntarily, and you're fine with it, right? So
Yeah.
I think there's some sort of a diabolization going on here that's not really
No, no,
helpful.
no.
I don't
You're
mean to
absolutely right.
right. So then the question is, um, well, am I really unwilling to let other people know something about me? Is it really that important to me to keep that information to myself? And in order to answer that question meaningfully, I think, or rather rationally, I think you need to have a lot of knowledge in terms of, well, I don't know. It depends. If it's really just about seeing shoe ads on Facebook, then I guess I don't really mind
Yeah.
it that much. Because but let's say, I think one of the legitimate concerns, and I should talk about that a little bit as well, so that I don't leave people with the impression that I'm completely fine with all of this, which I'm not. One of the legitimate concerns is that, what if some of these people that have that data are kind of cavalier with it, and you don't mind them using that data for showing you shoe ads, but maybe some of that data is not being protected well enough. Maybe someone can get their hands on it. Maybe it contains things um, like in the case of a
Political
targeted,
preferences.
right? Maybe someone can get to know you better, and that someone can be a really malicious entity, and they can come in and exploit your life in some sort of a targeted way. Now you really have to be a high value target. I think people like Elon Musk probably have to worry about that, because that's a lot of effort to get to someone. So you really
Yeah.
have to be worth the effort. So they have to be, hundreds of millions at stake here in order for people to come in and do that effort. But then there may be milder versions of that. And the thing is that I don't really know. Could it be, for example, you could imagine diabolical things? We could show you, we could maintain some online database of people with alcoholism, and we're going to
Mhm.
make that database available to employers who pay us. And we filled in that database through getting access to some online service that wasn't protecting their data. And you might be someone, well, I had alcoholism in my last year of university, hypothetically. I haven't had that problem ever since then, but now for the rest of my life, I'm branded as someone who cannot be relied upon to do work. And now, obviously, I believe that's what people want to avoid. I believe that's the legitimate concern
Want to hear
when.
something interesting on the topic? In Italy right now, there's a debate about people who are cancer survivors
Mhm.
being entitled to forgetting their medical history when it comes to the cancer after a certain amount of time, because it doesn't matter anymore, but they still have problems, I don't know, getting an adoption,
Yeah.
being parents of an adoption, or they pay more for insurance, or they might not even be able to get some types of insurance. But it doesn't matter for everyone. Like, I mean, an insurance is a private company. So I feel like if you have had cancer 6 months ago, it's probably fine to not want to insure you for life insurance, as bad as that sounds, because they're not, it's a risk-based business in the end. The premium will be worth more than the money you'd get if you actually pass. But 10 years after, it doesn't matter statistically. Like medical science shows that 10 years after, it doesn't matter anymore. Like it hasn't come back by now, you're fine. That's another interesting,
So
like medical.
that is absolutely very interesting. The problem here is that it isn't just insurance. It is and
Everything.
it's everything. Like it could be that let's say that I'm an employer. I have some sort of a small company, and it takes me 4 years to train someone before they can actually be useful in my work. So I want to make sure that whoever I hire is going to be with me for at least 8 years. And let's say that you know if I have the choice um, in hiring between someone who has had cancer some time ago and someone who hasn't, and I know that statistically the chance for the person who has had cancer to have issues in the next 8 years is maybe 15% higher than for the other
Yeah.
person. um Trying to come and require me to forget that detail sounds problematic.
Yeah,
Now
it's as problematic as the detail itself. Those are all super interesting conundrums. That's why I find this cancer thing particularly interesting, because you're right, it's not fair for both parties, if you get what I
right.
mean. Like it's never going to be fair.
Yes. And so obviously, uh, you know, we live together because we help each other out. And the society helps us and we help society. And whether you make this too much about one versus the other, whether we make this, we're all living in order to advance society, which is the Rousseauian, kind of like society is what matters at the end of the day, or whether ultimately societies exist in order to help individuals, which is the like John Lockean um, view of the world. These are complicated matters, but I think whichever way you go, or you could say, whichever way we go, if you end up going too badly in one of the two directions, it metastasizes in either complete selfishness or in a tyranny. Like it's
Yeah.
neither of which are good. So then the question is, well, how do you then navigate it? And I think the answer to that is you're probably going to be better off if you let these situations be resolved as low as possible in the hierarchy of governance of the world than if you try
I
to
see.
mandate them at this high level. Let's make it a law in Italy that if you have a cancer patient, a recovered cancer patient, let's be hypothetical, you're required to hire that person, like because we're countering the acts of cancer. It's like,
That
yeah,
becomes unfair
I
in other
mean,
ways. You're right.
it's always unfair to someone, um,
Mm.
and it's very easy for us to condemn people uh, in whose situation we're not. And in general, for example, employers are a group that's being condemned, for example, a lot often than others, just because everyone is in an employer-employee relationship, or not everyone, but like the vast majority of people go through an employer-employee relationship, and the vast majority of people are the employees, right? So you get in this situation where you could think that in general society, it's very easy to see them lean over in defense of the employee, and kind of it's easy to abstractize the employer and think about them as this all powerful, omnipotent, um, abstract
Yeah.
company that is there just to serve me, and to forget that there's struggling people behind it. You work at a startup that's gotten very successful lately, but it wasn't so long ago that it was just a small startup. And like any startup, you didn't know what tomorrow was going to be made of. and you were taking a lot of risk. You were not there climbing the hierarchy of some big corporation. That's for which you need time. You need years and years to get to the tops of a corporation. That's a career that you have to dedicate your life to. You choose not to do that. You choose to go in a startup. That means that you're putting a lot on the line, and if that thing doesn't work, you are back to square, well, maybe not one, but you're back to square 2 or 3 in terms of your career ladder. And so you're doing that because you've made your choices. But it seems rather unfair that someone will come and tell, oh, and by the way, while you're doing that, keep in mind that you're doing it for the employees. Like, you're all doing it for the employees. And Ayn Rand essentially was ridiculing that approach. Now, you could say that Ayn Rand was very extreme in her ridicule. Like, she wouldn't give any moral good to the side of the societal. For her, like, the only thing a person should ever do was be interested in their own advancement, and then as a consequence of that, everyone's advancement will follow. And like, she was completely excluding I think because she was trying to essentially oppose herself to the other trends in society. She was completely excluding the notion that there might be virtue in sacrificing yourself for society. So, which I don't think is entirely fair either, but she obviously builds a strong case.
I think how it feels like to me is that solving any of these things, including privacy, by law is literally never gonna work.
But yet, that's what we're doing, right?
Yeah, that's completely. I mean, how do you solve the cancer survivor bias issue? By informing people. You sit down with everybody, you speak, you go on television, you go on whatever media, social media, and tell people, look, guys, anybody who's had cancer for more than 5 years is probably totally fine, and shouldn't be a factor in you choosing to employ one of them, in insuring someone, in helping someone. Here's the numbers that prove that. Please listen to me, and eventually the majority will follow, because most people are not dumb.
Yeah, you know what? Actually, I think you're right. And I think I mostly agree, but I think you're being a little bit too optimistic, and you don't need to be that optimistic, because essentially the idea, I agree with you. Every time you have a disagreement, the best way of addressing that disagreement is through conversation and through exposing of both sides. If anything, because you don't really know who's right. You don't really know. You might know who's right today. You might know who's right. We're back to this rational evaluation of your next situations, right? You might know who's right next week, next month, but you don't know who's going to be right 5 years or 10 years from now, who was righter, right? It's very, very complicated. So you have to, you don't, no one knows that. So for someone to go and impose a solution on an entire society, you have to be very careful. I'm not saying that it should never be done. We obviously have imposed ourselves things, but you should reserve that for some very, very rare occurrences, to go and say, on a national level, I'm going to mandate thing. And that was the principle of, I think that's an Italian invention, although I don't believe Italy existed back then. But the principle of subsidiarity is you should delegate as many solutions as possible to the leaves of a structure. And every time you go up the hierarchy, there should be less and less problems that bubble up that require an intervention at a high level. And let me say this. Let's say that one side is clearly wrong, okay, and the other side is clearly right. You have to be careful, even in the case when that is true, because unless you let the side that is wrong play out, then everyone has more of a doubt that this side was really wrong. And there's value in letting the bad side fail, because then it is very, very clear for everyone why this was a bad side. I want to be very careful here. There are certain things you don't want to see play out, for sure.
Yeah,
Like,
that's the problem. Like, making it. Let's take to the total extreme. Murder is illegal. You don't want to make murder legal and then let people see murder should be illegal, because by that point, a few thousand of people have been kill. So that's the extreme. I see there's
right.
some cases where, or
We
prisons are illegal, so we don't like prisons, so we open all the doors and everybody can just get out of prison. That's not going to work.
right, exactly. And these are all, so we say murder is illegal, but we kind of support murder in the case of a war, right? It's like, well, if someone is dropping bombs on us and they're coming in with the guns, obviously we're going to start murdering them. That's the problem, that it's never really simple. There's always exceptions. And then what was I supposed to? Well, even in war, actually, it turns out that no, it's not a good idea to let just people kill anyone else. We're going to have these rules about what's it called? War crimes.
Oh yeah.
So it just everything becomes so complicated. So
Some things are acceptable in war, but not all of them.
yeah, that is
That's
the
pretty
case.
much.
And I think if we have one takeout out of the vote would be my request for people that look, if we made exceptions in our more ethics and in our laws, if we made exceptions for things that are as egregious even as murder, and if murder is actually, or let's say homicide or taking a person's life is actually cautioned by the state is accepted by the state in certain cases, if even for that horrible thing we made exceptions, then keep in mind that there aren't any things likely where stuff is shit. And obviously I'm coming up with examples in my head. No, actually there are certain examples of things that no, there's no justification for that in any circumstances whatsoever. I don't want to be absolutist. I do believe that there are universal values that should never be transgressed in certain situations. But those aren't that many. And my point with the killing, taking a life, is that even that we haven't been able to have a one sentence rule for, right? So even that we've had to caveat. So if we had to caveat even that, then what is it that why do we think that something as complicated as online privacy is going to be a problem that you can solve simply? It's not going to be simple. I think
No, no,
that's
no.
the position that I'm starting to land in. I don't know where it will end, but I think I'd like to invite people to not be as simplistic about this problem as
Yeah,
many people are.
there's a few happy mediums, but some of them require considerable technical knowledge. Just to, I mean, you could start by not using
Yeah,
most social networks. You can browse Twitter as anonymous. You can still browse Twitter if you're not logged in, by the way.
right,
So
right.
you can browse Twitter anonymously if you want to know what's going on. You're probably not going to use Facebook, but then if you're not logged in, you don't really care. And the rest of browsing, ad blockers, etc. There's some reasoning about the blockers though. Like ad blockers prevent websites where providing good content from being able to provide that
Yeah,
content. I think that's where the success of Medium lies. There's a few blogging platforms that you pay $3, $4 per month, which is more or less what they make off you as an advertising target, anyways. And then you can browse them free of advertisement. They still make the money. And welcome back.
this was my browser crashing. But I
Huh.
agree with you about ad blockers are um, it,
Eh,
a bit of a radical solution, because it's like, yes, I'm sure that there are people who are callous with your data that take more stuff than they would ever need. I'm sure that if we start looking into details, there would be plenty of overuse of data and maybe some really bad examples. I'm sure that that's the case. But morally, keep in mind that morally, you're still trying to take someone's service and use it
yeah.
on your own terms. Um, that's not how we usually operate. If I'm holding an object here, you can't don't if it's my object, if this is, let's say, a dollar bill, you don't just get to come and take my dollar bill on your own terms. That's not how we operate. So,
The alternative is going to be everything is paid for, which is sort of how things are turning out. But I don't feel like that's bad. I mean, I'm super happy giving $4, $5 per month to a service I will go every day to anyways, just so they can survive
You could,
without having to.
yes, you could do that, but I think about YouTube, man. It's I think I've gone and followed in YouTube classes from the best universities in the world, from the best teachers in the world. That sort of stuff. Think about this. In order to watch, let's say, some Harvard's professor
Mm.
class on online, you have to have been born in the United States. You have to have had the upbringing and preparation for exams that would have let you have to have had been accepted in Harvard, and then you have to had actually picked up that major and gone in there, be there on that day, and be careful and concentrated and focused on that day, so that you don't even miss what they're saying in front of you. Whereas if you get this unfocused a little bit while watching that class on YouTube, you can always go back and watch it again. So and all of that you can do for free today on YouTube on your own terms entirely. I think that this is an incredible achievement of humanity, because you are essentially opening up um, society to absolutely anyone. You're lowering the barriers to productive participation in society to an extent that has never been achieved before. I have access to the same information out there that like
Oh
the
yeah.
richest people in the world. And YouTube is making that access available. Google is making that access possible um, through some model that they have made work. It hasn't been simple to make that model work. Remember, YouTube was losing money for a very, very, very long time after they got launched, and now obviously they're extremely successful.
Oh
And I'm
yeah.
not saying that they're without their flaws. I have a lot of problems with this, how they choose to do moderation. But overall, I think they're a blessing to humanity is to have that abundance of information freely available. You can be born poor. I come from a very poor country. People who grow up in Bulgaria these days have access to this same information as people who are born in very wealthy families in the United States and who can actually go to Harvard. So
Oh yeah.
I don't want to lose that. And if Google decided that what this takes is like the way that it's not that the only way they could make this work is by making an ad funded model, then I'm willing to buy that. And if you're not, just don't go to YouTube, right? If you
Mm.
really care that much about
Yeah.
it. So so I don't know. I don't use an ad blocker, and
You don't?
I don't, and I because I simply don't go to places that I don't um that I don't want to, that I'm not okay with whose terms I'm not okay. Um that's where I stand. That doesn't mean that I would automatically condemn anyone who's doing it. Everyone makes their own choices, and I just happen to land here. If I don't want to go, if I don't want to use something, if I'm not okay with their terms, I just don't use their service.
That's a very good point. Yeah, just it's respectful because people. I mean, if you don't, if you think it's correct to help people with your advertising, then you go there. Otherwise, you don't. It's absolutely a good position. I think I'm a bit worse than that, in that I do a lot of anonymous browsing, some ad blocking, etc. But then I do pay for the services I actually use. So occasionally, that really only comes into play when I'm googling solutions to video games I'm playing, and I'm too lazy to find a way out of some boss fight or something. So that's pretty much where ad
Yeah,
blocking
and
comes into
look,
play.
I'm not making any claim that, and there's certainly things that I do in my life where, if I sit to think about it and say, probably shouldn't have done that, and I try to not do it, but it's look. You could also make an argument that if I do these things, then I'm also, you know, and compromising the viability of the ad funded approach. And you could say, some people could say, I think that the ad funded approach is actually bad for humanity. And I think it should be discontinued. And this is my way of battling against it. Maybe that's a coherent defense to mount. But again, I don't support that, because that would mean no free YouTube, or at least not that we
Mhm.
know of. Maybe they'll come up with some other way to, uh, you know, to do it. Maybe you'd be able to do the ads without the tracking. Maybe then the ads wouldn't pay that much, and maybe then YouTube wouldn't be able to be self-funded. Who knows? I don't know. So I'm not really casting judgment here. I guess the only place where I get really annoyed is, we run the Me Jitsi service, for example.
Yeah.
And we try to be, our history as a project has always been one where we're extremely conservative with regard to privacy. And we, if there's anything that we can do to protect your privacy, we do it. And so when we run the Me Jitsi service, we actually have to maintain it. We actually have to know how many people we have from different places so that we properly provision services and things like that. And for that, we do some amount of analytics. Now, none of these analytics are actually mappable to users. We don't know who these people are. And yet we've gotten criticism for, well, why is it that you even have analytics here? And I have a problem with that sort of entitlement. It's like, wait a second. I am trying to find a way to give you this thing without taking your money. Okay. And I want to support it. We also show an ad of 8x8 at the end of each call, right? And people are, oh, why are you showing me this ad? And like, at this point, this entitlement starts to really irk me because, hey, dude, I am doing work so that I can solve your problem, and I'm not charging you for that at all. If you don't want my work, if you don't find it's valuable, then all right, solve your problem some other way. It's not my problem. But to come and use my product and to demand that I run it somehow differently without any regard of whether that different way is actually sustainable, whether it could even work, the entitlement to that approach really irks me. And I don't think it justifies, given like it's completely divorced from the complexity of the world. On the one hand, it's really, really complicated to go and maintain a service for money, let alone for free. And on the other hand, people will approach you and criticize you, and as if that's the most trivial problem. And let's just go and oh, you're doing it badly. Well, good. What are you doing?
We would all like free energy, but it just happens to not be here quite yet. Maybe we'll get there.
Hopefully. Let's say that it will get there someday.
We'll try to get there. Cool. Well, Emil, thank you so much. It was a super interesting conversation, a bit different than we usually do, but we need this kinds of topic in the open source industry, even now more than ever, I think, because people are starting to fall into the habit of not caring about what happens. And at some point, some of that is going to bite us back. It doesn't matter where you want to turn on all the ad blockers in the world. You want just to someone in the audience will disconnect their internet after watching this video and just go live in the woods. That's probably not necessary, but it's a fair reaction, I guess. It's there's a lot going on. So anybody who cares about what happens outside of their immediate sphere will find it interesting to reason about privacy. Note that we don't have an answer. At least I don't. So
I don't either. I don't have an answer at all. And we started by saying this. There's not going to be an answer at the end of this. And my only concern was to just try and make sure that everyone understands that, hey, this is not a simple topic. Do not behave as if it is one. And we're all trying to figure this out together. So let's keep doing it, and let's treat this as a team effort. We're all doing this together, and let's respect each other a little bit more.
Yeah, that especially. That's I wish we'd spend more on free energy than other things that are happening right now.
That would be great.
That's that would be super great.
That would be great.
Cool. So thank you so much.
It was a pleasure, Luca. All the best to you and the SignalWire team, and talk to you soon.
And we had Emil Ivov on the show, founder of the Jitsi project, leader of the Jitsi project, vice president of product at 8x8, good friend of mine and the open source community. So thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, Luca, for having me. Bye-bye.
Rest of the audience, I'll see you next week. Goodbye.